All right, thanks, guys. I want you guys to give yourselves a round of applause. You guys are making history. This is the first carnivore conference. This is amazing. You know, when I did this, and all credit to all the people who have been doing this a long time. You know, the original credit for the carnivore diet is probably belongs to some Australopithecine from 2 million years ago, quite honestly. But you know, there's been a lot of people who've done this before I got up there and got crazy and have done this. But to see this happen, you know, all this room filled with people, we just had a great meal. You know, when you go to most conferences, after lunch, everybody's asleep, and we're awake because, you know, we're getting human-appropriate food. I want to do a little quick survey. I know Amber checked how many people were on a carnivore diet this morning, and the majority of you were. How many of you people here have been struck by lightning? Anybody in the audience ever been struck by lightning? No one. How about anyone ever won the Mega Ball Power Lottery jackpot? Really, one? See me after the talk. How many people here have gotten scurvy? One? None? No. So we can conclusively say that winning the lottery or getting struck by lightning is equally as probabilistic as getting scurvy on this diet. So I'm going to talk kind of in a broad sense. I know you guys had a lot of real focused science type stuff, and I'm going to kind of step out. I'm kind of a, you know, I kind of tend to be a big picture type of guy, and sometimes I look at some of this stuff and I say, does it really even apply to me, or does it really apply to anybody? And so I kind of look at it that way. So let me find the green button. We'll advance it. What did I call this? Evidence-based nutrition with a question mark. Okay. So this is kind of in general where we get our information from. Nutritional epidemiology, which is sort of rife with problems. Historical and cultural references. There's in vitro studies, animal studies. Human trials, there's some anecdotes, and then, of course, our own personal experiences, how we decide what we're supposed to eat. You know, epidemiology is about 80% of our nutritional knowledge comes from epidemiology, and usually, for the most part, you can't infer any type of causation from it. There are all kinds of potential confounders. Lots of biases are at play, including recall. But you know, when you hand people a food frequency survey, how many blueberries you eat in the last 6 months? I mean, nobody knows this stuff, right? But it makes for great headlines. You know, I saw yesterday there was a headline, eating a low-carb diet increases your risk for fatal cardiac arrhythmia. Anybody see that the other day? That came out, it was like relative risk, 17% increase, which is meaningless, but the headlines are generated nonetheless. This is a quote from Professor John Anitis out of Stanford University. He's one of the most published public health physicians out there. You know, this is a long statement that he made, and he made it more elegantly than I do, but he basically says nutritional epidemiology is a bunch of garbage, and we should just start over and throw it out. And I mean, not that I totally suggest we do that, but it's probably not far from the truth. Then we talk about historical and cultural references. Well, whose culture are we looking at? You know, this is what we typically think. This is what my grandmother ate. This is how we were eating for, you know, last 50 years, 100 years. But, you know, equally, we've got people that do this. That's what their historical references. I mean, if we were to go back to, you know, Mongolia 50 years and go in the rural area and say, what do you guys think about a carnivore diet? And they say, well, that was Tuesday. I mean, no big deal. And we're up here acting like we're crazy people. So whose culture we look at? In vitro and animal studies, again, I'm not a rat and I'm not a cell. I mean, you know, we see so much information that comes out of this stuff, you know, that we think we can extrapolate to, and there's a lot of problems. The nice thing about animal studies are they'll be compliant with the protocol, and you know, you can get that stuff. So there's some advantage there, but there's definitely some shortcomings to this sort of stuff. And then we talk about, you know, human trials, you know. And there's a lot, there even, you know, like I said, it's not like it's a hopeless cause, but there are certainly shortcomings there. You know, often when we look at nutritional studies, and I'll go to the last point there, people ask, well, there's no long-term studies on a carnivore diet. How do you know you're not going to drop dead of a heart attack in 50 years or get cancer or not live to 92 and only live to 91? I mean, there are zero, with a capital Z, long-term randomized control studies on any diet. There's none that have ever been done. There are probably none that will ever be done. You'd have to lock up, you know, 500 twins in a metabolic ward for the rest of their life and control every factor. So we can never know this information. But there's people out there saying, well, there's not long-term data, and yet there's no diet that has that data. You know, often they're short-term because it costs a lot of money. Nobody wants to pay for that. The endpoints are typically biomarkers, And just biomarkers drive me crazy because, Dave Feldman, where's he at? We learn from Dave, cholesterol, it changes every day potentially. You can change it, 100 points in a week. Do you guys know this vitamin D? We talk about vitamin D deficiency and all that stuff. How much does vitamin D vary throughout the day? 30%. Your vitamin D level can change 30% during the daytime. If we talk about the microbiome. We get all these stool samples, we send it off for a microbiome. Well, guess what? They did recent studies, and the microbiome that you get from a stool sample doesn't even match what's in your colon half the time. When they do biopsies, they don't even line up. So we have all these biomarkers where we try to figure out what's going on, and we don't even know what they mean. Let's talk about uric acid, right? Uric acid is associated with gout. If uric acid is high, it's a bad thing. Well, guess what? If uric acid is really high, your likelihood of getting multiple sclerosis is almost nothing. And so we have these biomarkers that go up, they go down. We don't even really know what's going on there. So what happens is we learn about a new biomarker, we get an epidemiologic study. Guess what? Everybody that had high homocysteine levels had a higher risk for cardiac disease, and therefore we now want to do everything we can to possibly lower homocysteine. We don't know if that's actually true or not. We just assume it is. And then we find out later that maybe that's not the truth. It's very difficult to blind participants for a nutritional study, right? I don't care how good the Impossible Burger tastes, you're not fooling me, I'm gonna know I'm not eating real meat. So there's some real problems with this stuff. Anecdotes. This is a website, meatheals.com, that myself and Michael Goldstein, I don't know, he's out here somewhere, started. This is one of our anecdotes. And let me just ask you guys a question. For you guys that have started a carnivore diet, how many of you guys decided to do that diet based on some sort of story or anecdote? How many of you guys that did that? So most of us, right? How many of you guys read through the literature and came to the conclusion that I'm going to do a carnivore diet? Okay, so one person, two people up here. But realistically, this is what kind of moves the needle for so many people, and so I think it's very powerful. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to start this stuff up, because I think, changing the narrative requires a powerful tool, and this works pretty well. And then there, of course, the N equals 1. We're all here about we're all our own N equals 1, and we always hear over and over again how N equals 1 doesn't really matter. And maybe there's some validity to that. There's a lot of evidence for or against meat, but there's a lot of it out there that's basically against meat. All the headlines say that. And one of the reasons for that is, again, we talk about there's no long-term randomized control trials with meaningful endpoints. We're talking about you eat a lot of meat and maybe your LDL cholesterol rises, perhaps maybe your TMAO level goes up. This kind of nonsense that we talk about, that we hear about all the time. This is the other thing. When we look at meat eaters in epidemiology, they're not even studied. There are no meat eaters. There's people that eat a few ounces of meat and the rest of it's plant food. So we don't really have any good endpoints on that. Probably the only modern population out there that we know about is probably Hong Kong, where they eat a pound of meat a day, which is nothing compared to what we eat, and they live longer than anyone else on the planet, and they have the highest IQ, incidentally, which is kind of interesting. And again, the short-term studies with just the biomarkers. This is the other thing. We often look at these in vitro animal studies, and they look at isolated compounds with unrealistic dosages. And I would point to you things like the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and the heterocyclic amines. If we char our meat, we're going to get cancer. But again, those studies were done massive doses. It's stuff most of us would never do. We probably have to eat completely black steaks that are not going to taste good anyway for that stuff to be, relevant. And again, that's not in a functioning human with a functioning liver. We talk about all these plant compounds and how they have these hormetic effects because they induce enzymes that will now make us tougher and stronger. But when we make that same argument, what about these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons? Does that do the same thing? It actually do the same systems often. And then again, this is the other thing. It's just really hard. It's tough to, it's expensive to, and what they tell you is, it's the best we've got. We've got kind of not such good techniques, study mechanisms, and so we just have to make the best of it. And so that's what we have. And so I kind of equate that to I call it the nutrition science airlines. And so we're flying on it. We've got a broken wing, holes in the fuselage, the wheels are broken, the engine's missing, and the motto is, it's all we can afford. And that really is nutrition science, in my view. And so, enjoy the flight, guys. I mean, and when we look around I didn't fly on those guys, but I've heard some bad. But I mean, literally, that's what our population looks like as a result of nutrition science, in my view. Can we do better? I don't know. Maybe we can. But one thing we maybe should actually study people that actually eat meat, like not a few ounces a day. Maybe we should look at truly meaningful endpoints, and so rather than what our cholesterol level is, something that is actually meaningful, and we can argue about what that is, and then focus on human beings. Instead of these lab studies on rats and mice and whatever else. What are the obstacles to getting this done? Well, funding, and I put up NCBA, those guys are the guys from the beef organization that got a bunch of money. Maybe they'll kick in some, hopefully, private philanthropy, industries or other industries or universities. The problems, again, we can't, like we talked about, we can't blind the participants. Can we get it through an IRB? Are they going to still say, it's so dangerous because you're going to raise your cholesterol, or, meat is going to give you cancer. If you do a 30-day study, we're all going to get cancer. We're all going to get scurvy. That's that question. I don't know if that's, something you can overcome. They did, obviously most of you guys know about the Stefanson study from 1928, which showed people could go a year without problem. Industry pushback, we kind of see this today. If you look at the headlines, it's becoming so obvious. You guys have probably some of you guys heard about this keto crotch thing, right? That they made up. Yeah, I'm sure everybody here has that. But I mean, it's not even. They're not even trying to hide this stuff anymore. They're just out there. They hate the ketogenic diet, and a carnivore diet, obviously, in many cases, is going to be a ketogenic diet. So they're pushing back really hard against this. And then there's a bias, because if I'm doing this study, obviously I've got a bias. I'm going to be like, yeah, meat's good for us, right? But I mean, so we got to figure out how to eliminate some of that stuff. And so, what do we know so far about meat? I know that it doesn't appear to grow limbs back. It doesn't seem to give you any powers of flight or any other superpowers. And so far, immortality does not seem to be one of the benefits. Although we're gonna pitch. Like I said, my goal is to live forever. So far, so good. What do I know? And this is the only thing I can say for certain. 100% sure I got something wrong. I don't know what it is. Probably a lot of things, but at least I know enough to know that I don't know everything, and I'm learning every day. And this is what the great thing about this conference and the podcast I do. I learn every single time, so it's great. I feel like I'm cheating when I have a podcast. I tell you, I'm jealous of Joe Rogan. That guy gets a lot of knowledge put his way. All right, what can we not find out? I don't think we can do a study that's going to tell us if eating is going to shorten our life or prolong our life. It's just not going to happen. We're not going to be able to ever figure that out. Is it going to prevent me from getting or dying of a particular disease? And I can say I don't know, except for ESV. And I don't know if you guys know what ESV is. That's end-stage veganism. So, sorry to Dr. Greer. I always pick on him, but it's just too easy. Sorry. Anyway, so what we might find out, we might get some subjective and objective clinical markers found out, and we're seeing that we can kind of look at that. Relative changes in body composition, blood pressure, lab markers, imaging, and so on and so forth. New reference ranges. Amber alluded to some of this stuff in her talk on RDAs. I mean, I've maintained, and she has for a while, that maybe those RDAs don't apply to everybody equally, and I think we're seeing the fact that, I'm not drop dead of scurvy and none of you have, kind of tells us maybe the RDAs don't apply to everybody. And then the same thing can be said about a lot of these lab markers. Is a low T3 a problem? Or is it normal? We don't know that stuff. And so I think those things can possibly be figured out. Short-term impacts on disease and physiology. Again, everything we're going to know is really going to be short-term. It's not going to predict your future. It's just not. We can guess and assume it is. I mean, and I like to say, what I like to say is the best predictor of your future health is your current health. And so if you get healthy today, and however we define that, you're likely to be healthy in 10 years, and the converse is true. A lot of us out here, we don't need a study. We know, we've discovered it. But is there a reason to pursue that? And Nina Teichholz out there, I think, will probably tell you, we probably do need some studies, in all these areas to kind of move that needle. Physicians, there's a lot of physicians that are doing this, and they're brave enough to get out there and say, hey, I'm going to tell my patients that, let's do something that actually works instead of, fearing for their lives. And I can tell you for sure that stuff happens. But if we've got studies out there, physicians will be more likely to prescribe that diet and benefit their patients. People are more likely to try it. Again, most of us did this on an anecdote, but we're still a small minority. But if there's some studies out there that say, look, we did a carnivore diet and our inflammation markers went down, or our glucose got better, and that's not hard to do, and I think that's what it would show. There's going to be more people that are likely to try that. And then just, advancements for our knowledge. Who's going to benefit? Who's not going to benefit? What diseases work? There are so many questions that I have, and we see a little bit of dissension among our participants. Is it grass-fed? Is it grain-fed? Do we need to eat organ meats? Do we not need to eat them? Which people need to eat them? How much protein do we need? How much fat do we need? Does exercise impact that? So there's a lot of things that we can learn in this sort of carnivore realm. The traditional research paradigm, scientist has an hypothesis, he has an observation, although it seems like the observation doesn't count anymore because they discount some stuff. It's more like, let's just keep, confirming the paradigm. He designs a study, they got to get funding, they got to perform the study, maybe he publishes, maybe maybe he doesn't. We see that some of the criticism, some of the drug studies, a lot of those studies never get published and we never see the data and we only see the good stuff. Maybe it'll make an impact, maybe it won't, maybe it depends what journal it gets published in. It needs to be reproduced for it to be considered, a real thing, and it's a very long process. I think it's several years from inception to, changing our mind on this stuff, and it might take 10 years of study after study to have people, really change their paradigm. You can outsource, and this is something like guys like Tim Noakes like to talk about, is the wisdom of the crowds and outsourcing it to the crowds. There are some advantages and disadvantages to that. The good thing is, most of the people, like if we want to look at a bunch of people that have some sort of medical issue, they have skin in the game, and they have a vested interest in learning this stuff. When I was practicing, I would get patients in there and they would have some disease that it was kind of a rare thing that I didn't really, I didn't know that much about, but they knew everything about that disease because they live with it 24 hours a day. So these people really care about the outcome. And that again, that can skew it both ways. But when you have, via things like social media now, we have the impact, the ability to reach tens, even hundreds of thousands, even potentially millions of people very quickly. And so you can get massive numbers of people participating, and you can figure out, big problems pretty quickly. You can figure out what works and what doesn't. Lots of potential. There are lots of potential problems. All this social media stuff. It's a landmine of knuckleheads and trolling and all this crazy stuff. But there are a lot of good that can come from that. So this is something that I did myself and a fellow named Matt Mayer. We met up in the spring of 2017 after I kind of started doing this diet. And people were kind of commenting on it, and I just kind of said, hey, would anybody want to try a carnivore diet for 90 days? And literally had hundreds of people said, heck yeah, sign me up for ribeyes. So we kind of did this stuff, and I'm not a researcher by trade. We had no money, we had nothing to do. We just said, well, let's kind of see what happens. And so, we got them to go for 90 days, and I know some of the people in this audience participated in that study. And so we had some subjective measures, some objective stuff. It was all self-reported data. There was lots of problems with this. Survivorship bias. We were unclear on the attrition rates because we couldn't tell, who signed up, who didn't enter data. There's all kinds of problems with this stuff. We had differential reporting for different metrics, so we would ask people to measure this, this, and this, and some of them would measure this, some of them would only measure certain other things. Again, we're not professional resources. We didn't have a control group. We didn't have different we didn't really select people based on different diets. So there's all kinds of problems with this. But nonetheless, we got it done. We got a little bit of data out there. There's my man, Matt. He's not here, but I'm sure he'll be happy to see that. We had, range from about 60 to about 100 people that actually entered data for different topics. Most of it was males. And it seems like the carnivore diet adherents tend to be more males, although it's quite, this seems maybe close to what I'm seeing in the audience now. Age range from 20 to 70. The biggest group was most of the people were in their 50s. On average, people ate about 2 pounds of meat a day, which is, I think, what most people would say is pretty typical. One of the problems is Matt designed a little app. He just designed it from scratch, and it was clunky, cumbersome. A lot of people complain about it, but we did it for free. It was the best we could do. On average, the average starting weight was 90 kilos, and people lost 14 kilos over the 90-day period. So that's about 30-pound weight loss for the people that stayed in. So I think that's pretty significant. And then we saw a drop of about 8 centimeters in their abdominal circumference, which is quite a bit. This is about poop, because we always got questions about poop, right? So we sent everybody a Bristol stools chart. And so if you guys haven't seen this before, they actually score this. So I guess maybe the gastroenterologist would be excited by this stuff. But supposedly, like I think 3, 4, and 5 are considered better, maybe 4 being the ideal poop, if you will. So anyway, so this was what we got. And this is as you guys see, the average score was right about 4.2 when you average all those numbers out. And so this is what the people that reported. And so, there's a lot of variability, particularly at the end as less people got excited about reporting their data. I know as I did it, every day I religiously stuff. And towards the end, I was like, damn it, I'm tired of putting this stuff in. So you get stuff where they weren't reporting data. And so we had some variation. But the average was right at about that Bristol 4, which again, for all those people that are wondering about bowel movements, we checked, and that's the information we got. And this was the frequency. So how many bowel movements do people have on average per day? And this ended up about 1.2 bowel movements per day was what we ended up having. So again, this whole thing about you're going to be constipated the whole time, it doesn't seem to turn out in the end when you look at enough people. This and I swear I did not pick this chart. This was something that came here. This is a Erection hardness score, and they use plant-based, things to do that. And I swear I had nothing to do with that. But I find it funny that tofu gives you a flaccid, limp thing there. And so the average score and the people who reported that was like a 3.5. So between the banana and the cucumber. I was a 4 every day, I can tell you that, guys. All right, so this is some of the subjective data we collected. And again, it's subjective, but I think, to me it matters. And I think how you feel really matters. These are a little hard to read, but the purple means greatly improved. The green means moderately improved. The yellow was kind of unchanged. And then the oranges was a little bit worse. And then the one on the very left, the dark purple, I guess, was, or the blue was it got worse. And so we looked at general health, and it's just from left to right. General health, either no change or got better. Remember, some of these people were already on the carnivore diet, some people on a ketogenic diet. Joint health, again, the trend on all of these, joint health, sexual health, gut health, mood, energy, exercise capacity, skin health, and sleep quality, it was either they didn't get worse or they got better or a lot better. And that was, consistent throughout the people, with 1 or 2 people that got a little worse. But that's what we had with that. Despite all the flaws out there, when it comes to meat-based research, we probably got as much as anybody. I mean, outside of probably, Dr. Clemens over at Paleomedicina and that study from 1928 or the studies that were generated from the 1928 experiment. I mean, this has probably helped a little bit. Can we do better? Of course we can. Like I said, my goal this year and the next couple of years is to try to see if we can get some research directed our way. I just want to, if I've got just a second, I want to just one other thing that's more of a kind of a hope of mine, that we can kind of start to match up all of us that care about our health and understand that meat is a vital, important part of our human nutrition, and start working with the producers, the cattle ranchers, kind of form a coalition between these guys, because I worry that we've got all these hardworking ranchers that are doing a job providing us this wonderful product. It's going to be taken from them, and we see these bigger and bigger companies that are out there, these big processors that they're investing in alternative sources of meat, plant-based meat, synthetic meat products, and we'll eventually kind of take that stuff over, and we'll see plants mixed in with our meat, and we'll see the push for synthetic meats, which I think is a bad thing. So I hope we can find a way to get the producers involved and get the consumers to team up with those guys. Okay, thank you very much.